Okay, so once again, thank you for your attendance this evening. I thought I'd give a talk about just selecting HF transceivers. It's a sort of question that comes in about every other month, but I don't know whether it's been locked down or people have had savings and decided to spend savings or whatever. And you know, there's I've had a request. I suppose about 3 in the last 2 months about, you know, what do you think about so-and-so? Would you buy this as your first transceiver? And I'd given a talk about 2 years ago on the same sort of subject. And I thought it's probably not a bad thing to try and give it again, but also try and update it. So this is kind of a talk, which is a kind of personal talk really about, you know, what I think about in terms of buying an HF transceiver, but really trying to put myself into the shoes of somebody who's buying a transceiver for the first time. So it may be somebody who's newly licensed, or it may be somebody that, say, has been working, you know, handy talkies for a year or two and then wants to suddenly get back into HF and or get into HF. And the other thing was, of course, the sunspots spot cycle has now kicked off, and sometimes it kicks off with a vengeance, and the HF conditions are extremely good, and people think, well, you know, I better get back into HF or do some HF. So I thought I'd run through this presentation again, if you bear with me. Next slide, please. So where to start? Well, where to start is not really opening a checkbook. It's really deciding what you want to buy. Those of you that don't know what this transceiver is, it was, apart from the Hill balloon, it's probably one of the most expensive transceivers you can buy. That's the price of a small mortgage, really, and it weighs a large. I think it weighs about 40 kilos, and it's got power supplies in and high power in, and its performance is extremely good. But it retails around about, you know, £11,000 or so, and really is perhaps not the entry point for a transceiver. Next slide, please. And we've all got to start somewhere. And I don't know what year this was, but that's my first couple of pieces of commercial gear which I bought secondhand. And in those days there was no eBay, or there was no ham radio deals or whatever, and you just bought it from other hams. So I got the receiver and got an old Kodar 85, I think it was, transmitter. Next slide, please. And when you looked at the Kodar 85, I don't know where any of you, there was a requirement many years ago, that you started on 160 meters. And Kodar produced this Kodar 85, which on transmit was kind of okay, and I adapted it to actually get it to work properly on 80 meters, and I changed the coils inside and things. But you know, that was 12 watts, which seemed to me to be enough at those days. It cost me £16, and the power supply for it cost £8, and that was quite a lot of saving up in those days to get something that worked. But that's what I used. And in June 2020, there was one on Ham Radio Deals, which is a website. They were £135 the guy wanted for it, really. So there you go. I did have the receiver at one side. I don't know what happened to the receiver. And I had the Kodar 85 for quite a long time. It was just collecting dust, and I eventually did get rid of it. But I had the receiver, which was absolutely awful, but the actual transmitter worked pretty well. Next slide, please. So really, I'm kind of agnostic to pieces of kit. You know, if I like them, then I use them, and if I don't like them, I probably don't buy them, really. And I've owned quite a number of rigs over the years, and I currently own JRC. And this is a slightly odd picture. I know it looks better on that screen. It may do, it may not, but it's all the aspect ratios wrong. But the JRC is absolutely beautiful, and I've got that kind of on the shelf, and I sometimes do use it, and the audio is exceptional on it, and I think the selectivity is exceptional on it, and I really enjoyed using it. But it's of its time, and as I'll come to it later on, it doesn't do some of the things that you really would like to do. So you know, it's got a fairly rudimentary data output, and yes, you can just about cat interface it, but it has no audio output for data. It has no panoramic display. So, but if you want to actually run a rag tube with it, it's absolutely superb. So I own that, and I also own ICOM, and I also own Yaesu, and I have, over the years, owned other things as well. I think the JRC is really something that I cherish, really, and therefore it's probably become an antique, and I probably only use it about once every 3 or 4 months to turn it on. But I do know what I like, and I know what I don't like. And if something works well, I tend to like it. And if something's easy to use, I tend to like it. And really, some of what you like really depends on what you want to do with it. I'll come to that a bit later. Next slide, please, Francis. So what have I learned? Use your money wisely. Most of the time, you can only spend the money once. And I know from my first rig, which was an earlier JRC, it took me 2 years to save up the money. But it can be an expensive hobby, and it really is a question of do your research and do your research and do your research, and talk to as many people as possible. And get their feedback as well. But before you do that, really, that you've got to put that RF into something that's going to radiate and give you a signal. So, one of the frequent things when somebody phones up or emails in or whatever saying, what should I buy, is I ask them about their antennas first and what they've got, because without a decent antenna, it doesn't matter what you're using, you're never really going to get out. And many of the stuff that you buy on websites and fancy aerials that will give you multi-band and they're only 6 inches long is really a dummy load, and so therefore I think that's and if you've got a budget, I always think that spending at least 10 to 15% of your budget on the antenna is a good thing. I think with VHF it tends to go up actually a bit on that, really, because you tend to perhaps have greater requirements, but for HF 10 to 15% of the budget seems reasonable as a place to start for the antenna. And the best thing to buy is something you've researched. So the best thing to buy is sometimes what your friend at the club has bought and had a look at it, and you've had a go at it, and you've tried it, and you've seen it a couple of times, and preferably if you've had a go using it, you've even used it in something like a contest where you can really tell whether it works well or not. I kind of learned a lesson that the last club I was in, it was kind of like K3 City. Everybody had Elecraft. I hated them, absolutely hated them. And I didn't, as I'll show you a bit later on, technical performance was superb, but I absolutely hated the interface that allowed me to use it. And I tried and tried, and then we set up a couple of club stations, outdoor events, and then we had a few contests, and the more I used it, the more I hated it more. I mean, I just did not like it at all. So, I almost bought a K3, and just because everybody else had one, and I realized after a bit that it just wasn't for me at all. Would I consider a K4? I don't know. I'll go and look at it and see what I think, really, of the latest K4. Oh, next one. Does that jump one on or not? That's okay. So when you're going to buy something, really, you've got to decide what you're using it for, really. Do you want a base station? And with a base station, the older versions of them came with power supplies internally, and they were tended to be heavy and big. Nowadays, with the the ICOM 7300, the power supply is external. I think the manufacturers have realised that it's better to make them without power supplies. And actually, a lot of the time, the power supplies were the problem. That JRC transceiver that I absolutely adore, the weak link was the power supply, and I had it rebuilt commercially because it just blew at one point, and it was worth the money to me to get it rebuilt, but it was always known as the weak link on that transceiver. And I'll come back to weak links a bit later on. But so do you want it for base, or do you want it for mobile? And you can do stroke P mobile HF, or do you want it for SOTA and something you can put in your pocket and go up a hill or whatever? You're going to think about new or used. Good stuff, used if you buy the right stuff. you know, you get value. But sometimes, you know, it's an opportunity to get new technology, and you buy for newness sometimes. Shack in a box, has it got to do everything really for that? Depends on how much space you've got at home and whatever for that. And then there's some extras now, perhaps, you know, 4 meters has become an extra. If you're not going to tend to run 4 meters and just want HF to 6 meters, then, you know, that may be a deciding for you. We had a guy at not my last club, but the club before that actually owned an amateur radio shop. So he actually never changed bands, he just changed transceivers. And he had a whole rack of transceivers, and depending on, on 20 meters, he's on this set, and 10 meters is on this set. And, you know, but if you want to sort of know that you're going to be a change band, change transceiver merchant, and I've got to say, I do that a bit. I run 4 meters from one specific transceiver at home because the others don't do it. And so I do actually do some of that. But this guy was the ultimate, 160 to 10. He had a rig for every band and never changed bands. And I think underneath it all, again, it depends on what you're going to use it for. But if you're a contester, you've got probably more demanding requirements than if you're going to rag you and or chase DX sometimes. And so therefore, you may want to consider that. Next slide, please. So how do you go about looking at, you know, what to buy? Well, I would say overall, although you get fancy adverts and we all kind of drool over them sometimes and salivate excessively over them, really, that it's best not to buy off an advert, really. It's all best to look at it by actually going and having a look at one and trying one, and you know, just buying something mail order and never seeing it, I think is you know, something that you lose completely. And you know, the manufacturers, and I don't know if you've ever tried talking to any of the manufacturers, but I've talked to ICOM a fair bit over the years, and they've been incredibly helpful. And sometimes they've dissuaded me from some things rather than encouraged me some things to, you know, to adopt their kit. But, you know, and the distributors tend to know their products pretty well. And yeah, okay, they'll try and sell you something because that's their job and that's their business. But you can glean quite a lot from them. Overall, I think some of them know anyway, at least, that if they have unhappy customers, they'll tend not to come back. You know, you can glean quite a lot and try at a manufacturer. So I would never buy a rig unless I've tried it, really. And that may mean going to shows, rallies. It may mean going to, you know, Friedrichshafen or Dayton or whatever you want to go to try them out. I think the things to be careful of really are where they say it's been reconditioned, and if it's been thrashed, you sometimes don't really see it. It all looks fine, but it's been thrashed, and you know, power supplies or PAs or whatever have been thrashed, and you know, I think, you know, be careful of that. You know, recent stories about being careful of what they regard as B stock sometimes can be illuminating too. And decide if you want to be a pioneer of the first batch of a new product. I did that with an FT991 for Yaesu, and the PA lasted about 12 minutes, and it got sent back, and then I had another one and that got sent back, and eventually they worked out that the guy in Japan who was setting up the PA bias had some sort of misprint in the protocol, and he was setting the biases wrong, and all the kit coming out the factory didn't last very long. So the third one worked fine for years, and you know, I never had any more problem with it. But you know, decide whether you want to be a pioneer. And you know, it's not uncommon to have firmware updates, as we know, early on. You know, as you know, manufacturers quite logically decide that they're going to learn as they earn. And that's not uncommon. And I think one particular manufacturer does more of that than others. I think, you know, my experience is that ICOM tend to get it right, and Yaesu are very happy to learn as they earn, really, on that. I think the other thing is beware of comments that it takes the product out to left field. So things like, it's the smallest ever made, may not be a good thing, really. And so, you know, if there's something that actually makes it atypical, without perhaps the benefit of that sometimes, then that may be a warning on that. But don't get bamboozled by the fancy adverts. And the other thing is that when you're making the QSO, do they really know what you're using at the other end? They just want to hear you and have the QSO. So they haven't got a clue what you're using some of the time. Sometimes it sounds better than others. At contests, we set the profile up to be one in which we growl at each other, frankly, to make sure we're heard. It don't sound good some of the time, but we actually want to make the QSO. But well, that's right. But the person at the other end, making the QSO with you, doesn't really know what you're using, but is always asking you about what your rig you're using, and we'll compare and contrast them on that. But so it doesn't matter whether you're using something that for £50 that's 50 years old sometimes, or just out the block that's thousands of pounds. They won't really know. Next, it's all about you really. So this is just some general guidance really, if you're buying stuff generally. So I'd steer clear of kits, and in particular Heathkit. I know I did bring that Heathkit fairly recently, and I'd put lots of hours into making that work properly. And it's a bit hit and miss, when you get something like Heathkit, you're never sure who's put it together, how they put it together, and how reliably they put it together, and whether it meets the spec. And some of the Heathkit specs were, not great. So I'd be careful of kits. But there's nothing wrong with commercial used once you know what you're buying. So again, research it and talk to people really. I think value a warranty. So if you're not sure, a warranty may push you over the edge. And certainly, when I've had to send back stuff on warranty, I'm pleased I had the warranty. But it's pretty rare, and by and large, the kit, if you look after it properly and use it properly, is pretty reliable. Always do your research, and there are forums for almost every rig and every manufacturer. There are Facebook groups, there are local radio clubs like ours. Come and talk to people and see what they think. And I always think if you're buying it from a dealer, find out who the engineer is that the dealer's got, and whether they've got an engineering shop and they've really got somebody that properly technically understands the kit. Because if not, they're just selling boxes off an internet kind of sales process. So there is one or two dealers that I've used that I've gone to them because they're not the cheapest in the land, but I like the engineer that I'm talking to really. Next question. How do you do the research? Well, talk about going out to look at these forums and Facebooks. There is this book called The Rig Guide, which Steve White put together. And I think there's several versions of it. And it even gives you prices of what you think, if it's in, fair condition, good condition, etc. Have a look at that. And it's got a profile of that. It isn't a fantastically full kind of document really, but it gives you the basics there and gives you guide prices and things. And you can check out prices on eBay, which you've got to take with a pinch of salt, just like that Kodar AT5 really. I mean, you've got to decide whether that's a fair price for you really, and you can look through the history of that. Ham radio deals is another one. Again, you've got to know what you're buying and done the research before you buy it. And you've just got to recognize sometimes you can't test it and can't extensively test it before you actually get it. So, there are risks for these things. And there are, free ads on Radcom, and occasionally I've walked through Radcom, and by and large, because it's in Radcom, I've kind of trusted the people a bit more than perhaps I would have done if it had been in a general advert. Next slide, please. This is quite handy. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but eham.net is quite extensive. It's a bit American, but there are lots of, it is worldwide, but it's American. I choose that, but there again, there are two UK stations, and that's the feedback for the JST 245 really, and it gives an overall rating, and it gives tell you what people think of it really. So I think you're researching a rig, go and have a look at that. Some of it you need to take with a pinch of salt, But it's a good background to how people have found the rig, sometimes how easy it is to use, whether it's been reliable, unreliable, or whatever, and the issues they've had. Next slide, please. Now, this is really, a technical component to it, and you probably can't see any of this. Can you see any of it? No. So I just recommend that you go to this, really. You can go to Rob Sherwood's tables, and Sherwood's tables is really the kind of league of performance of these rigs. And Rob Sherwood gets one in. He's got an extensive, in-depth lab, probably more extensive than the ARRL or whatever, and he ranks rigs on performance of that, and I'll come to some of that in a minute. But just to read this off for you, the ASU FT101D is top of the list at the moment, and it's followed by the Flex, and it's followed by the an IC receiver, and it's followed by Elecraft, etc., etc., etc. And you can go through all these, and really what it tells you is that a number of things. Next slide, please. It goes through some of these things. So he looks at what the noise floor of the receiver are, and that's a note. These are all receiver metrics, really. But he looks at the noise floor, and he looks at the AGC threshold, and the blocking, and the sensitivity, and the phase noise, and the front end selectivity, and the dynamic range, etc., etc. And you can go and read about all these things and see what it means for you. But overall, if you look at the top 20 receiver elements of transceivers that have probably been made since about 2012, yes, there's a league table, but actually it will be very hard to discern number 1 versus number 19, to be perfectly honest, I think, in the real world. And then beyond that, you will see a difference. So I think overall, it all depends on what the Rob Sherwood tables mean to you, and looking at those criteria. I won't go into those. But he only looks at received performance, and it also depends on what bands you look at. And sometimes, it isn't all there. Generally speaking, SUPETs are still at the top of the table. SDRs are good, but, the AD processors, it isn't that there aren't AD processors, but, at prices that hams can afford, those are the AD processors you get. It probably is where, Flex and probably have got theirs towards the top of the list. Doesn't actually profile transmit performance at all. And really, I think that's, in fairness to Rob, he recognizes that, and he's going to start profiling transmit performance. He did say in something I was watching the other day that he's now going to focus the next phase of his assessments on transmit performance, and really thinks that manufacturers are going to now step up. They've stepped up to the mark in terms of receive performance, but now need to step up to the mark in terms of transmit performance. And really, it looks like pre-distortion correction on transmit is going to be the next thing that we'll have. Only the Apache at the moment has actually got that facility. But Flex and Elecraft, and I've only overheard this, I haven't seen it officially, but say that they're going to introduce transmit correction in due course, and for that you're probably going to pay a bit more on that. But pre-distortion correction will be the next thing that they introduce. Next slide, please. So what does it all really mean? Well, it means it depends what you are and what you want to do with it. So, if you're a CW operator, a sideband operator or data operator predominantly, you may view these tables in a particular way. What you're really paying for now is probably low phase noise and variable attenuators and AGC control and whatever, and you've paid a bit more for that. Sometimes a lot more from that. If you want to work a lot of contests where you want lots of adjacent big signals, and you want to make sure that the filtering is good, then you're going to take notice of that sort of data and buy accordingly. And my experience of my Flex is outstanding in a contest, but overall, whether it's actually needed the rest of the time, I'm not sure. But you do get to a degree what you pay for in that. you know, if you've got local QRM and you've got another ham on your street, which is possible, you know, and you've got lots of adjacent strong signals from that, then that may be decided for you. But what you won't do, I think, is really hear the difference between number 1 and number 20, really, on that. And noise floor may well be the decider on that. So I think you need to look at all that Sherwood stuff and decide what's right for you. But by and large, I think most new radios are pretty good. Next. So, you know, they've tried to get more intellectual, you know, with some assessments. So gosh, I can't remember the guy's name, but a guy from the States has done is tried to look at how much you pay and what performance you get. And he's got a performance to price ratio here. So, you know, what he's done is taken Sherwood's data and he's taken the price of it, and he's taken the date of introduction, and he's got an average EHAM rating and whatever, and then he's ranked them all on there. And if you look at that, then, you know, you look at number 1, it looks like the Flex is probably, you know, got the best price to performance position in the table. And if you go down to the bottom, number 31, the FT891, introduced in 2017, you know, it's position 31, not position 1. So you have to decide what that means to you. But overall, if you look at it, there are some rigs there, which is a Drake, which is 1973, which still, you know, but people, it's a cherished antique. So, you know, how objective all this is, but all the modern rigs are kind of towards the top, and they all fare pretty well. Next slide, please. The other thing to bear in mind is buyer's remorse. I just kind of wanted to mention that. So it's not uncommon that we kind of salivate over these adverts, and we eventually buy something, and there's euphoria, really. And then as you buy it and get it home and plug it in and stuff and begin using it, it begins to be disappointing. It wasn't quite what you expected. And then after a bit, you kind of go through that. You realize that actually, once you begin using it, it's beginning to actually come back and it's going to come back, and it's beginning to actually sort of deliver what you wanted from it. And there's a recovery phase. And I think the real key thing is that if you buy a piece of kit, give it a fair chance, really. Read the manual again. You've probably seen these books, but there's a rig user thing that for some of the modern rigs. And I find that a really useful book, because I kind of go through the manual and make sure I understand what's where. And then I read the user guide, and the user guide really tells you how best to use the rig. And, you know, those two things together are worthwhile. So read the manual, learn to operate it, and you may need to be patient. And one or two people, you know, have said to me, well, I couldn't get on with it, but actually you probably have not spent enough time with it, learning it. And I've got to say, I've been in that situation with the Flex. I get incredibly frustrated with it because it doesn't do what I think it should do. But I just need to sort of step back 3 paces again and realize that it doesn't do it in the way that I thought it did it, but it does actually do it. And I just need to find the, you know, understand how the best way to do that is. So really, you know, there is, you know, just beware of buyer's remorse with all this. Next slide. So what's my first rig? Well, you know, if I had nothing, I think those 2 there would be the ones that I would go after. You know, the performance is pretty good, you know, Sherwood's tables. There's you know, secondhand, you know, they're generally widely available. You've done your research. But more importantly, you know, there are the ergonomics and convenience is pretty good. There's an FT450 there, one of the AC ones. That bring a 7300. I haven't got one anymore. But the things that, you know, really have made the 7300 stand out was it was you know, the first of its type. But you can see that it's actually got a panoramic display at the front of it, which I think these days is probably essential, and anybody new coming to the hobby would lose out a lot if they didn't have that. It has the data card on board, so really all you need is a USB connection to your computer to actually do data. and it just makes it very, very easy to do. Touchscreen that you're all used to with iPads and phones and all the rest of it. It's, ICOM have really got that right. I was in HRO, ham radio outlets in Washington, in the States, on the day that was launched. And it was just fortuitous. It was the day I had off, and I got Uber to take me down there, wait, and then bring me back. And I went to ferret around. And actually, that was the day it was launched, and the place was packed. There was a kind of launch thing on there. And the guy, within the first hour, had sold 30 of them in HRO. And there were just people just coming out. I went in for piece of aerial wire or something, and then to carry back through customs at Heathrow. But the guy had sold 30 in the first hour. That's how popular it was. And I think it's surprising that and I gather that I did overhear that ICOM have solved 1 million of them. So already, it's been a very, very popular rig, and fairly, that's what it does. It does it extremely well at a good price. So think about the cat audio connection. Think about whether you want 2 VFOs. Think about whether you want 2 receivers. Think about whether you really can do without the panoramic display, and whether you need an auto tuner. But those 2 rigs. I know the FD450 hasn't got it, but it's an excellent HF shack in the box. Really is a lovely little rig. This one here, it's got a tuner as well. Do they start coming? I can't remember if they came with a tune. That one has. Okay, that's yeah.
I think it was an option.
It was an option, yeah, that's right, really. So if my first rig, I'd look at those, but on that. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, really, most new radios are pretty good. All the big 3 manufacturers make good products. Just do your research, try stuff out, go and talk to people. Buy what suits you, really, particularly with the ergonomics, and how you use the rig. Right, and that's what really, that's why I rejected Elecraft. I just did not like the way that it actually you actually use the rig. And talk to as many people as you can about what you're buying and what you're thinking of buying, and if it's new, make sure you try it out on that. So that's concluding statements on that. So I'm happy to answer any questions or any points for discussions, or any points that anybody wants to agree or disagree with me, really, on that.
One HF build up to use 47300.
Yeah.
That's a reasonable recommendation.
I think it is, really. I think that the only downside I think of the 7300 is the 4-meter performance isn't very good. The receive side is it's waning at that point, but okay, it does everything else very, very well, really. Any other questions at all, or any points that anyone wants to raise? Anybody disagree? I can't hear. We've got the audio on.
You said that you finally you got the curve.
Yeah.
So it goes down.
Yeah.
It comes up. Well, I bought that DX10.
Yeah.
And I thought it was going to be such a brilliant rig. When I got it home and turned it on, and thought, let's compare it with something else. I just hear just the same things. It works just like a normal rig. But of course, it does have better performance if you're in the conditions where you're going to actually appreciate it.
Yeah.
But just for a general use, I think something more akin to 450 or whatever you've got there.
Yeah, you're right. I mean that hasn't got the panoramic display and whatever, but the other thing has. Yeah. And it's it's an attractive price to entry point, isn't it? Really, on that.
7300 seems to get 750 or 800 second hand.
Yeah. I think they tend to, within reason, hold their price as well. Yeah.
The warranty is transferable between purchases.
Yeah.
By second iPhone, it still gets a manufacturer's warranty.
Yeah. Yeah. And that may be a good point.
So anyone on Zoom have any comments or thoughts?
Did you want to mute them? You muted them.
No, they can unmute themselves.
If you do just unmute yourself if you want to
The only thing I was going to add to that is being only recently licensed the last 18 months, that sometimes the shack in the box is the way to go, but you often don't know what it is you want to do. You don't know whether you want to be SSB, you don't know whether you want to be data. So sometimes you just got to buy something that kind of covers all avenues and you can kind of grow into.
I think in those situations, Mark, it's best to buy second hand and something you can trade on again, really, to try it out sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I did. I mean, I looked at second hand, but certainly when you look at second hand these days, second hand is often just as expensive as new. And as you say, you then value the warranty, and you think, well, actually, for a little bit more, I may as well go down the actual new route. But as you say, if it doesn't fit what you want to do when you've had a chance to learn it a bit, you just pass it on. Seem to hold value quite well.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know whether there's a shortage. I mean, there was at one time a kind of a market where everything in the UK was going across to Eastern Europe for sale, and so prices went up a bit here to attract them and to get the stock, and then apparently you could get higher prices in Eastern Europe. Whether that's the same now or whether manufacturers have stepped up and those markets get supplied, and I don't know. Okay, well, thanks everybody. Thanks for listening this evening. Hopefully there's something there that has been useful in terms of selection and just some general thoughts there on that. So we'll see you in a couple of weeks' time, and there'll be stuff put on the boards again about the program and the Christmas do, etc., etc. And hopefully we can welcome people, a few more people back here at the TMOC. Thanks. Good evening to everybody, and we're now